Thank you and welcome again, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar hosted by the Australian Peace and Security Forum. Australia is one of the wealthiest countries in the world, yet too many people lack security of housing, security in health, security in education. First Nations people face greater insecurity, with only 4 of the 19 goals in the Closing the Gap strategy currently on target to be achieved. Such insecurity within our nation leads to tension within the community and can undermine social cohesion.
I didn't even tell you, this is one of the 2 webinars around security and also the United Nations. This one's why is human security not a priority for Australia? Do you want to listen to it, or shall I just carry on?
Mute.
Okay.
Chris,
if you could mute, that would be good.
Mute, Chris?
Oh, yes, sorry.
I'm not sure who's speaking, but if you could mute, that would be terrific. Thank you. So where was I up to? Insecurity within the nation can break down social cohesion, can lead to tension within the society. To some extent, we already see that with extremist groups starting to raise questions because they feel they are left out. Human security should be the foundation and the outcome of national peace and security. All people matter, and only when their basic needs can be met can we realistically expect to have peace and security in our community. Why does Australia not give top priority to addressing the needs and vulnerabilities of individuals and communities? Why is human security not a priority in Australia's national security strategy? This is the central question for our discussion tonight, and I'm delighted that we have 3 speakers tonight. And I'll begin by making an apology for the 4th speaker. Regrettably, Sue Wareham is not able to join us. She's recently travelled and came home ill, and so she didn't feel up to it tonight. So I'm sure we all wish her well for a quick recovery, and I apologise on her behalf that she will not be joining us tonight. But we still have 3 excellent speakers who I'll introduce in a moment. This is part of our 3rd quarterly report. The APSF, the Peace and Security Forum, has been publishing quarterly reports on peace and security. This is the 3rd of them, focusing on human security. The first looked at regional security. The second looked at environmental and climate security. This one is looking at human security. And we're planning a 4th one before the end of the year that'll look at economic security. So our focus tonight is on human security with the title of Stayin Alive. What can we do to ensure that all people are staying alive and benefiting from living in our community? So thank you again for joining. It is being recorded, as has been mentioned, and if you could stay on mute till later, that'd be terrific. Thank you. So let me begin by introducing our first speaker, Dr Julie Maken. She's worked as a senior writer with the Australian Financial Review, has been a political consultant to both Federal Labor and the New South Wales Greens. She's held senior positions in Greenpeace, ActionAid, and recently graduated with a PhD that examined the reasons behind Australia's abuse and occasional torture of asylum seekers. So I'll hand over to Julie. Welcome, Julie. Thank you for joining the webinar tonight, and the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Russell. And it's really lovely to be here and lovely to see so many others concerned with this subject. I just want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'm on land that was never ceded. I'm on land that was stolen. And I really acknowledge First Nations people, past, present, and their leadership emerging. The book I've just published started, book opens on the morning after the referendum by asking, what have we done? And I think that's a really important question to be asking, what have we done? And it's not unrelated to the question of human security and national security in Australia. As Russell outlined, I have worked, I guess, in various ways to try and understand Australia, to try and understand why the Australia I was born into, I grew up under Gough Whitlam and Hawke and Keating and Fraser. I grew up in an Australia that was finally coming to grips with the truth of our colonisation, an Australia that was finally turning around and looking back at where we came from and recognising the foundational violence that laid the groundwork for the nation that we are today. And in that recognition of colonial violence, we were once again reconnected as a nation, I argue, and this is what my PhD was on, using a psychoanalytic frame. I argue that we reconnected with the reality of who we are. That is a nation built on violence and dispossession, a nation very much in need of saying sorry, and a nation that really needed to come to grips with this new place that most of us are on. And we were doing that work. You know, I remember Whitlam pouring that red dirt into that smaller hand of Vincent Lingari. I remember that photo. I remember that moment. I remember Hawke talking about treaty. I remember the 1988 celebration of the bicentennial. I remember standing at Central, seeing thousands of First Nations people coming down the street and the joint erupting. I remember a really different Australia to the Australia of today. It was a lot more chaotic. It was a lot more creative. It was a lot more exploratory and asking ourselves, who are we? What do we want to be when we grow up? Where do we live? What are we in relation to Asia? Is it time to become a republic? Should we ditch Anzac for Kokoda? Should we actually have a treaty like every other grown-up country? And while we're there, let's have a Human Rights Act, actually. Let's put in the framework for a mature nation that is finally at peace where we belong. It was very heady stuff. It was very exciting stuff. And in the end, Freud, in his paper on Mourning and Melancholia, and that's how I kind of contrast these two periods, Freud warns that any person or nation trying to come to grips with the truth of who they are and the loss of what they have loved. And, you know, we had to bury the belief that we were a kindly nation full of gentle settlers who arrived to a nation just waiting for us to tame it. Anyone who goes through this period is going to go through deeply distressing times. It's going to be very disorientating. It's going to be very disturbing. And people will find it very distressing. But if we hang on, the promise in going through that, the promise in recognizing where we come from individually and collectively, is that we continue to be able to love as individuals and as a nation. We continue to be able to be creative, because we never lose contact with reality. And it's the contact with reality, the vitality and turmoil of what is promised by reality, that keeps us moving forward and creative. I say we lost contact with reality in 1996, you know, just to put a date on it here, when, you know, we agreed with John Howard that we would go for a relaxed and comfortable life on condition that we never look back, that we let go of the past, we stop asking ourselves tricky questions, and we just move forward as a relaxed and comfortable, very average people. And we couldn't get enough of it. We voted him in with a 47-seat majority. And since then, we have reinforced that commitment to not look back every chance we have collectively had. So that's the groundwork for where we are today. Psychologically speaking, we're a nation no longer in contact with reality. That is an extremely dangerous position for any person to be in, it's a very dangerous position for a nation to be in. I point in the report, I point to 3 areas where our lack of contact with reality is most obvious and I suspect potentially most dangerous. These are climate change, our defence policy, and our relationship with America. At the moment, in terms of climate change, what we have happening right now is a Labor government. It could be a coalition government. It doesn't really matter. They don't change that much. We've got a government saying, we will meet our targets. We are responsible citizens. We will okay 30 new coal and gas mines. And we will okay the biggest carbon bomb that we have okayed in the Northwest Shelf. And we will do all of those things at the same time as we are seeing from 2019 onwards, the fires, followed by the floods, followed by more floods, followed by now the massive algal bloom. Like, we are copping a hiding already from climate change. And, you know, Murray Watts will get up. Before Murray, it was Tanya. They would literally get up and say, we are on track with our commitments, and yes, we will open another coal mine, as if those two are not related. And we are expected to look at that and go, yeah, that makes total sense. Now, if this was an individual saying this, you'd go, look, you need treatment, hun. Those things are mutually exclusive. But because it's a government, we rumble on. We rumble on. Recently, the kind of, I guess, most glaring example of that was a few months ago, the Northwest Shelf is okayed. That's a 40-year project. That'll blow our carbon budget out of the water. It'll lead to all sorts of devastation. That was okayed for Woodside. And shortly after that, the first half of the climate change impact report was released. And I'm sure you've all seen it. You know, the predictions are dire. It is diabolical. Bad things are going to happen in this country. We're going to see a lot more of internally displaced people. We're going to see a lot more concern around food security, water security, species extinction. And this is in Australia, a very safe, very rich, very small, sparsely populated country. The other half of that report hasn't been released yet. The other half concerns intelligence matters on what's going to be happening in our region in 20 years' time. It hasn't been released because what's going to be happening in our region in 20 years' time is a nightmare. It is an absolute hellscape where Indonesia is battling for survival, where low-lying countries have gone under, where there is a massive external and internal displacement of people, and where the Australian Defence Force is asking itself tricky questions like, what do we do with the hundreds of thousands of people headed for Australia? Do we bomb them? Do we let them arrive? What do we do? So rather than say to the nation, as a grown-up in contact with reality, government would, here's the facts, this is what we're looking at by our best guesstimate, we have to prepare for this. The government simply puts out first half, says, yeah, we're kind of on track apart from all the other stuff. And the second half of that we won't see. Which kind of leads to the second threat we face as a denial of reality, and that is our defence. I was going to call it a plan, but that's possibly too ambitious. Our defence posture, our defence position, what we're doing with defence. Given the threat that climate change poses, both directly and indirectly to Australia, given the kind of work we need to cope with what is coming, one would think that $400 billion would be very well placed to be put in harness to an Australian Defence Force that was tooled up to actually do a couple of things, like 1, defend Australia, and 2, support life in Australia as we come into these climate impacts, and possibly even 3, build up our neighbourhood and our region and help tool up other less resource countries to support them. But because we're not in contact with the threat of reality of climate change, we are not doing that. Albert Palazzo's fabulous book, The Big Fix, and others really beautifully demonstrate that, in fact, what we're doing instead is by spending $400 billion to buy submarines that will never arrive from an ally that cannot be trusted, in order that we fix the shipyards of a country that actually we should have left a long time ago. It is, and in the process of doing that, we are surrendering technical, logistical, strategic sovereignty almost entirely. To do that, we are handing over a lot of West Australia, Darwin. We're building listening bases all across Australia and putting a huge target on us for a war that we should never, no one should be thinking about the war that Trump is keen to have. But we should certainly not be imagining for 1 second that we should be involved with a war against our biggest trading partner, and actually a country that will wipe the floor with us before they've even got out of bed to have a phone call with Trump about what's going to happen if Trump doesn't back down. Like, we have just made ourselves the thing China undermines and attacks, if necessary, before they get to the negotiating table. And we have done that because we completely lack imagination, and we completely lack contact with reality from that would say, we don't need to do that. We don't need to do that. The final area that I think this denial of reality can be seen exercising is our relationship with America. Don't know if you read Bernard Keane in Crikey. I'm a bit of a fan of his. A few weeks ago, he said, imagine this. Australia is trying to deepen a relationship with a country that has already said to another country they were very close allies with. Russia attacks Ukraine. Ukraine tries to fight back. The US comes in kind of behind Russia, and then meets with Russia and says, don't worry, Ukraine, I'll sort out what you get left with after Russia and I are done. This is the guy that we are forming a deep relationship with, that we are saying will defend us, will step in for us when this happens. He's a man who embodies almost the opposite of every value for Australia. He's capricious, he's cruel, he's totally unreliable, and he makes a big joke out of that. He's already said, maybe you'll get him, maybe you won't, maybe we'll just take your money. Actually, maybe we'll just take your bases. I mean, this is not new for him. And Anthony Albanese is packing his bags as we speak to go over there and really try and sell AUKUS to Trump and really try and sell the relationship. This
if
is...
you could wind up, please,
Oh,
Julie.
sorry. Yeah. Oh, I'm so bad at this. I'll leave it there. Maybe there'll be time for questions afterwards. My apologies for speaking for so long. I should have put the alarm on. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Julie, and thank you for being so gracious to wind up quickly. Yes, with a bit of luck, there will be some time for questions. So thanks for your presentation. Now let me introduce Ludmila Kwitko. She's Associate Professor of the Gender Institute at the Australian National University and is the Asia Pacific Regional Representative on the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, WILF board. Ludmila has also extensive international experience and as a civil society representative to the Committee to develop Australia's first national action plan on women, peace and security. She's been a very close watcher of the UN resolution on women, peace and security, and I'm sure will bring us a little up to date on where that's at on its 25th anniversary. So thank you very much, Ludmila.
Thanks, Russell. And thanks, Julie, for getting us going on this really important topic around human security. I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm joining from the lands of the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri peoples, and to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to acknowledge all First Nations people who may be joining with us today. I'd also like to acknowledge the diversity of women, children and civilians who are in situations of conflict and distress as we look across the globe and across the many countries and regions in this year, 2025. I'm going to take a slightly different perspective to Julie in terms of looking at the regional and the global context, and then come back to where Australia sits in that as well. And I also want to just raise the question, if we can perhaps go back to this at some point towards the end and in our discussions about, is staying alive actually enough? Should the question be, how are we staying alive? Who's making the decisions about how we stay alive? And who's got access to the livelihoods and human rights and security? And who prioritises and defines that security? So what I'm going to focus on today is just talk briefly about anniversaries, because this year, 2025, is a year of many commemorations and anniversaries, and they bring into sharp relief and sharp consciousness, I think, in the presence that it's been 80 years since the end of the Second World War, 80 years since the establishment of the United Nations, and the 80th anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And my focus is going to be on the 25th anniversary of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda as we approach the 31st of October. An agenda that came out of and was born out of the Security Council, that group of people who make decisions about international security and policy, and try to keep peace, not terribly successfully at this point in time. And this was the first landmark resolution that we need to ask questions about. How has it actually gone? What's been the progress? And what does it actually mean for us when we talk about understanding human security? Most importantly, it's also time for the global community, nation states, governments, regional bodies, multilateral bodies, private sector and civil society to actually step up and take stronger action and to deliver on the repeatedly promised commitments of fully implementing this agenda to increase and to address sustainable peace and security. At its very core, Women, Peace and Security, WPS, is about the diversity of women's experiences, human security and human rights. And it's not about making conflict safer for women. In 2025, the world needs more human security with more women, peace and security, not less. So, as I said, 25 years ago, the Security Council recognised that the experience of women participating in decision-making at all levels with respect to conflict and post-conflict settings, it's an important recognition which we seem to have forgotten after 25 years in real terms and in action terms. It's based on 4 fundamental pillars: prevention, participation, protection and relief and recovery. And it reaffirms the important role of women in the prevention and resolution of conflicts, peace negotiations, peace building, peacekeeping, humanitarian response, and in post-conflict reconstruction, and stresses the importance of women's equal participation and full involvement in all the efforts for the maintenance and promotion of peace and security. It also calls on all parties to conflicts to take special measures to protect women and girls from gender-based violence, particularly rape and other forms of sexual abuse in situations of armed conflict. And it highlights in particular women's meaningful participation in peace process, from negotiation and mediation to peacekeeping and reconstruction, which has led to sustainable and inclusive peace, with consistently more durable peace agreements when women are involved. Ignoring women's contributions undermines the peace and security efforts and perpetuates the gender inequality and reinforces harmful stereotypes. And I must say, as I look around at the narratives in the media that, and images that we've seen over the last few days, and while I applaud the fact that hostages have been returned home in the Middle East, to Israel, I look at the images that are being purported to be building peace, and I really ask some serious questions for fairly obvious reasons. Also, since 2004, there's been about 114 governments who've adopted policies to enact the Women, Peace and Security agenda, and Australia is one of those. It's on its second Women, Peace and Security National Action Plan. However, in contrast, the United States has actually cancelled its Global Office on Women's Issues and Women, Peace and Security activities, and it's currently actively working against the inclusion of women in peacekeeping. However, it's the global context that kind of drives this all and brings it back together. So you have to start asking why, with all this support across many governments for national action plans, why do we now live in a context where 600 million women, or 15% of all women in the world, live within 50 kilometres of armed conflict, more than double the levels that existed in the 1990s? And why does the Global Peace Index in 2025 confirm that the world has become less peaceful over the last 17 years? One reason is that military spending has risen again for the 10th successive year, exceeding US $2.7 trillion in 2024. There's a strong echo here with Julie. Ecological disruption also continued, with 2024 being the first year on record in which the average global temperature was clearly more than 1.5 centigrade above the pre-industrial average. And new global security and political uncertainties have arisen in recent years, particularly 24-25, challenging all kinds of assumptions about global security, international law, and economic and social relationships. In addition, the world's entering into a much more dangerous phase of nuclear development. Will the world's nuclear arsenals being enlarged and upgraded by nearly all of the 9 nuclear states? And disturbingly, at the same time, the UN Security Council resolution, UN Security Council members, the 5 permanent members, the US, China, France, Russia, and UK, those who are tasked by the UN as the most powerful body to maintain international peace and security, and who have the right of veto, are also those same leading 5 in upgrading their nuclear weapons. At the same time, for a lot of women-led and women's rights organisations, the financial situation, with deep foreign aid cuts and continuing humanitarian crises, is stark, with expectations that almost 50% could be forced to shut down within the next 6 months if current conditions persist. And the situation, particularly around conflict-related sexual violence cases, is increasing disproportionately, particularly on women and girls, with humanitarian organisations forced to do more and more with less and less. And recently, in August, UN Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict, Ludmila Kwitko, in a briefing to the Security Council, noted that global military spending in just 24 hours exceeds what is allocated in 1 year to address conflict-related sexual violence, and stressed that funding needs to rise, otherwise women's frontline organisations are going to go from underfunded to unfunded. So you have to ask yourself, after 25 years, it's kind of hard to see the progress when increasing numbers of women, girls and civilians are caught up in increasing conflicts across our globe and abused by conflict-related sexual and gender-based violence and displaced from their homes, their livelihoods and their families, in a context of growing global authoritarianism, backlash against women's rights and gender equality, normalisation of misogyny, poisoning our global politics, a shrinking of space for civil society, and the erosion of international human rights law. And this is with the prospect of ever-increasing militarization as the driving global deterrence strategy for security and peace seems to be increasing militarization. So has the women, peace and security agenda been lost to increasing global securitization and militarization? And where is the human in the human security? And yet we know that women across the globe are fighting and continuing to work for peace. And women's human rights defenders have long argued that the fundamental premise of the WPS agenda is that relegating women and their rights to the margins of decision-making further entrenches women's exclusion and prolongs violence, and this must change now. And then you've discounted half of our humanity. Your human security is in serious trouble. So recently, on the 6th of October, which is the date that Russia, who is the current chair of the Security Council for this month of October, and who is currently at war with the Ukraine, chaired what's called the UN Security Council Open Debate on Women, Peace and Security. And the Secretary General for the United Nations spoke at that debate, and he said, "We speak of inclusion, yet far too frequently women remain absent from negotiating tables. We speak of protection, yet sexual violence persists with impunity. We speak of leadership, yet women peace builders are underfunded, under threat, and under-recognised. And we all lose, women and men, girls and boys. The world does not need more reminders of that truth. It needs more results that reflect it." And that is the issue, isn't it? What are the results that we need to move to? And what is the kind of engagement that we need at a political level, not just funding, but actual political will to make concrete actions and changes for human rights for millions of women and girls in conflict zones, humanitarian crises, and millions of civilians facing forcible displacement and statelessness. So the message is clear that the world needs more women, peace and security, not less, and the world needs more human security. I've got a list of calls to action here, and Russell, I just need to get a time check from you as to...
Yeah, I thought that was a terrific point to end on, because you're right on your time.
Okay. So I'll leave my call to action for the discussion, and I've also got some comments on what's been happening in Australia as well. Thanks very much.
Terrific. Thanks very much, Ludmila. Thank you. And so now let me move on to Donna Weeks, our third speaker. Donna is Emeritus Professor at Musashino University in Tokyo. She held the position of Director, Dean of International Relations for 6 years, a specialist in Japanese politics and Japan-Australia relations. Her teaching and research include political philosophy and peace studies. We're very pleased that to have her back in Australia, at least for part of the year. And Donna has a very interesting perspective, because Japan is one of the countries that has sought to put human security at the focus of their foreign policy. So the question that we all ask ourselves, is it possible to do things differently? Donna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Russell, and thank you, everybody, for attending this evening. And I too would like to acknowledge that I come from the land of I'm on the land of the Turrbal and Yuggera people here in Mungajin or Brisbane. I acknowledge and stand in solidarity with elders past and present. And when in Tokyo, also acknowledge the indigenous leaders in Japan, the Ainu from Hokkaido and the Ryukyu, or the Okinawans in Okinawa, whose day-to-day struggles are impacted by the American alliance in Japan and bases and so on. So there's growing discomfort there in Japan as well, because of the alliance and because of the militarization. So to begin, I guess people often say, well, people in international relations will say, yes, but, you know, human security, it's such an airy-fairy concept. What does it even mean? You know, what do you actually mean by it? How can you actually operationalize it is one of their favorite words. And so when I was talking to Russell about this, I thought, well, look, let's look at an example. How would two countries seek to use human security as a way to rethink how we might see security in our contemporary world as we move away from a militarized, hopefully, place. And I would say too that for me, one of the important words would be, and I think both Ludmila and Julia brought this up, is courage. We need courageous leaders who are willing to do this. We don't have them at the moment. That courage comes from us. People like you who are coming to join a seminar like this on a Tuesday evening. People like you in Japan, our compatriots in Japan, if you like, the women that I've worked with over the years in various peace movements in Japan, who don't want the increased militarization that we are seeing. So I know that there are people who are standing up to this. And to me, it's that disconnect between what we want, the courageous people amongst us, versus our leaders who seem to, indeed, in many ways, lack that courage. And as I was beginning to prepare this article for the report, for another project, I was reading Hannah Arendt, and I begin my chapter in this report with, by pure coincidence, I was reading Arendt's On Revolution, or rereading it. She published it in 1963. And my eyes fell upon this paragraph. Those who still put their faith in power politics in the traditional sense of the term, and therefore in war as the last resort of all foreign policy, may well discover in a not too distant future that they have become masters in a rather useless and obsolete trade. Now, that was 1963. It's kind of a long time ago, I guess. It's a bit more than not too distant future, but you know, Hannah Arendt, a German-American political philosopher, German Jew who escaped the Nazi regime in the 1930s, often wrote about this. What makes us turn to war? What makes us think war is the answer? And to sort of fast forward a little bit from that, speaking of you know, commemorations this year, well, next year, 2026, will actually be the 50th anniversary of, people may or may not know about this, the Australia-Japan Treaty of Basic Friendship and Cooperation, which was signed between Australia and Japan in 1976, which, if you think about it, was then only 30 years after what still had at that time in the community strong anti-Japanese feelings. It was in its own way quite a landmark treaty, and I use the word treaty. It wasn't an agreement. It wasn't, you know, anything other. It was an actual treaty which has some standing in international law. And so I took the opportunity to look at that again and think, well, what's going to happen next year in 2026? To what extent are we going to commemorate this 50 years of a treaty that was set to broaden our economic interests, to education, to scientific and technological exchange, to cultural exchange? In some ways, I guess, as someone now in their 60s, I'm kind of a product of this treaty, because not long after that, you know, Japanese was introduced to high schools. I started my interest in Japan at high school. I was fortunate to go to Japan as part of various exchanges that have been facilitated by this agreement. You know, and so while we have that to commemorate next year, if you look at the Australia-Japan relationship over the last 10 years or so, I would date it, in fact, back to 2005, but the more visible aspect, the militarization of the Australia-Japan relationship, has been in the last 10 years. So for me, as someone much more interested in human security and alternatives to security, for me, given we have this relationship, this treaty that says we won't do anything with regard to military, and it's not mentioned in that treaty by any means. For me, it's been a question of, where did it go wrong? What happened? Why couldn't we do things differently? I was doing my PhD research in the 1990s, that time in international relations when the Berlin Wall had fallen and all of us in the field were thinking, wow, there are different ways to go about peace. In the 1990s, this was where human security as a notion got a hold in Japan. Where did that come from? One woman whose work and whose life I hugely admire is, she unfortunately passed away recently, Ogata Sadako, or Sadako Ogata, to give her her English rendering of her name. She was for a while there the Commissioner for Refugees at the United Nations. And for her, what she saw in the refugee camps, she actually went into the field. She saw what was happening to people. And it was in many ways Ogata who came through with this policy of human security. We have to put people first. She'd been in the field. She saw these people. And so through that role and the commission, there's a much bigger story to that, of course, we can go through later if you want to. But see, it was a woman. She was out there in the field. She saw what was going on. And she said, well, and Japan at the time, to remember, and still is, I might add, constrained by Article 9 of its constitution. Article 9 of the constitution, which was put into the constitution in 1946 by the Americans, that said Japan would never go to war. Japan would never have the right to have land, sea or air forces. That's in the constitution. It's not been amended. Japan currently has self-defense forces through sleight of hand legislation. And we're just coming up to we're just having the 10th anniversary of that this year, when former Prime Minister Abe sort of steamrolled it through the Japanese parliament. So in a way, you know, Japanese military is kind of not legal in a way. It's not constitutional. It might be legal through legislation. And yet Australia in the last 10 years or so has, I think, done a lot to enable Japan's increased military position. So we have this notion in international relations where you have a security dilemma. People are saying, but we have to fight against China. We have to build up resistance against China. And so China builds its forces. So other countries have to build their forces. And so you have this security dilemma. The more you spend on military force, the greater the dilemma. I like to flip that and say, why don't we have a peace dilemma? The more countries try to demonstrate peace, would other countries say, well, if that's how you do peace, then we'll do it this way? That's my question, is how we could do better. And I think Australia and Japan give us that example. And so my work at the moment is about what might be. And so through with human security, it was Prime Minister at the turn of the 21st century, Obuchi Keizo, who said to Ogata, so, well, with this constraint of Article 9, he said, how can Japan perform a role concomitant to its economic position in the world? You know, we can't just, you know, we're supposed to be a military power, but we can't be a military power. What can we do? And so it was through aid, which was, elements of which were problematic. But both Ogata and Obuchi and others came up with this notion of human security, that if we secure humanity first, the rest would come. Now, I hasten to add that doesn't mean you don't have a military force, you don't have, that you do away with them. That would be too much of an idealistic position. But instead of, what we tend to do is put all our money, all our efforts and building up firstly those military forces. I know I came back to Australia after 8 years away and looked at our police force and thought I'd been looking at some paramilitary mob walking through Queen Street Mall. I thought, what on earth has happened here? Things like that stoke a sense of fear. So the Australia-Japan relationship, and I go into this in much more detail in the chapter, we could have done better. When, as I said, 50 years this treaty has been around. We could have engaged more with the region. We had ASEAN, we had all those elements. Two big missteps with Australia and Japan to a lesser extent. The Quad. We went from building strong regional, what I would call a security community, the framework of my work, to narrowing that, offending, creating distrust through the Quad, this so-called alliance between the United States, Japan, Australia, and India, which is supposed to, secure the Indo-Pacific. We then went and made an even bigger mistake with AUKUS. We went from some sort of level of trust within the region, and AUKUS just, excuse my pun, just blew it all out of the water. Suddenly we'd gone back to a 19th century Anglo sphere of military capabilities, which has just not served us very well in the region at all, and that's my area of concern. What I'm suggesting, and I'll wind up because my time is also up, is that Australia and Japan have had an opportunity, again, through courageous leadership, to show leadership in the region, to show that security can be done in different ways by focusing on the human. I hope that 50 years hence we might have been able to do that. So I'll leave it there with my time and look forward to discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Donna. And you've all heard it. If you want to know more about Donna's thinking in regards to what could have been and what can still be within the Australia-Japan relationship, read the book. Stayin Alive is available for free download from the APSF website. If you haven't seen it yet, please go onto the website. I'm sure you'll find that somewhere in something we've sent you. Aust Peace and Security Forum.org.au. and download the book, Stayin Alive. So thank you to all our speakers. We have some time for questions or discussion. There's no questions. There's several comments in the chat, but I can't identify any questions. Would anyone like to ask a question? Perhaps if you can put a hand up, you're a hand up in whatever way you'd like, electronic or physical, then I'll accept your question. Anyone wish to make a comment? V. Shringa, please.
Yes, I'd like to know from Ludmila, what are the 10 points what we can do? Because this is all total misery and we're all going to hell in a handbasket, and perhaps we are, but what can we do, Ludmila?
Thank you, Wes, for the question. What we can do, there's some two sets of things that I'll just quickly go through. In terms of if we look at what's being suggested in the international framework about what should we do on women, peace and security, I've actually got 6 points, so hopefully it'll be quick. The first is, and this isn't in the paper because I've rewritten some of this since I wrote the paper, so I'll just do this quickly. The first is we need to put human security first and stop arming violence against civilians. And as long as militarism and military expenditure are used to define security, women and girls are going to continue to face violence that is normalised. And fundamentally, this means addressing both the structural and the root causes of conflict. And that means really thinking about it, challenging ourselves, as both our other speakers have also said as well. And working with civil society organisations and civil society more broadly to actually move the money and prioritise actions for human security, for health, for education, for housing, for poverty alleviation, for climate. Second area is to look at ensuring that women take their rightful place at the peacemaking table and provide consistent support to them as peacemakers, peace builders, peacekeepers and human rights defenders, so that this becomes embedded in the way that we approach the regular business of peacemaking, and that we measure this impact in terms of the kinds of difference that this sort of work makes in terms of peace and security processes.
You'll have to speed them up, Ludmila, or we might not get to 10.
Okay, I'm not going to 10, I'm only going to 6.
Oh, good. Speed them up, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
The third is ending violence against women and girls and ending impunity for atrocities and crimes. The fourth is making sure we uphold international law and defend women's rights and gender equality. The fifth is making sure we embed WPS as part of everyday norms. So it's a hearts and mind things for all of us in our communities, but particularly young people, both boys and girls. And finally, and this isn't final, we need to support civil society movements across the globe and in our country as well to make sure that WPS is not just about putting the occasional bit of money into it, but it's actually driven by political will and a real commitment to human security. Thanks.
Thanks, Ludmila. let's go across the ditch to our Kiwi friend, Gray Southern.
Thank you very much, and excuse me for interjecting myself. Yes, I'm really fascinated with the talks, but I want to suggest that there's two basic, highly simplistic, two basic mindsets which is relevant here. One is the traditional security paradigm, which the military power brings security. And I suggest that it's fairly well entrenched in many societies, with the Second World War memory strong and various other wars around as well. The second paradigm is or mindset is about international cooperation, how we work with nations, how we get to understand each other and respectfully in a sort of equal basis. So it's really in-depth type of things in the way that Australia and New Zealand share in all sorts of ways. And to the extent that there's enormous amount to be gained from such cooperation, and a lot of that relates to human security. So a lot of benefits for human security can come from working with other nations in a host of different ways. So that's two different, completely different sets of activities. To an extent, they go on in parallel with in many situations. Whether they're inherently contradictory or not, I don't know. But I just put it forward that these are possibly alternatives or possibly parallel frameworks.
Thanks, Gray. Any of our three speakers like to comment? Donna, Julie, Ludmila?
Only to say that I think it's all hands to the deck at the moment. I think any approach we can take is a good approach to take, however we do it. I agree with Weiss, it does sound like the most doomsday 45 minutes we've spent today, possibly. But all I would say about that is that it is in these kinds of discussions when we confront the reality of what we're dealing with that we're able to actually put structures in place that change the story for us. Because while I talk a psychological background, the recovery process from this and the restoration process from this is based in politics. It's based in structural change and good policy that emanates from a truly aggressively demanding community that says we will have peace, we will not have what you're serving us. So, there are a million ways to take Tiger Mountain, and that just the sooner we get started, the better.
Okay.
I guess
thanks.
Sorry,
Donna.
Sorry. Yes, I just add to that, and it goes back to a webinar we had earlier in the year to the APSF when we were looking at, is China really the fear that we have? And I think Gray's picked up an important point. That international cooperation. I go back to education. I went in to do a degree in Asian studies not because I thought I was going to get a job, but because I was curious. I wanted to learn about other countries. I had the opportunity in a very grounded, comprehensive degree in the 1980s that looked at the Asian region, its countries in all their history, their society, their literature, their politics. Yeah, sure, there was economics there, but you didn't have to do it. These days, those degrees have changed to business degrees. So the only way we relate to Asia is through business. In the early 2000s, when all departments switched from politics and government to suddenly we were all international security specialists, we did away with courses at my then university on Chinese politics, Japanese politics. In other departments, they had literature. And we did away with those to amalgamate into one course called Problems and Issues in Asian Security. And I went and put my hand up and I said, look, that's not the way to frame a course, to engage people, to encourage people to get to know about our region. I was told, this is just the way of the world now. So for me, it always comes back. And as an educator, naturally, I guess, it comes back to the importance of that we know that we're encouraged to learn other languages. You just get to know people so well, and they're all in all their foibles. I'm not saying it's always got positive effects, but just to be able to engage, and it just reminded me of the earlier webinar this year. It's like we've got to get back. Education has got to be a significant part of what we do, and not be afraid to have those sorts of courses in our country.
Thanks very much, Donna. Thanks to Matilda. The link for the website to go and download your copy of Stayin Alive is now in the chat if you'd like to pick it up. Ian.
Yeah, thank you. I just thought I'd share an anecdote from today. I was running a Model United Nations at a co-educational school for about 100 students in Year 9. The UN Association of Victoria runs Model UN throughout the state, and about 4,500 students participate. But I wanted to tell you about today's because the subject was, in its broadest manifestation, global security. And we had a very eloquent statement from the representative of Costa Rica. All the students are randomly given a country that they have to advocate on behalf of. And the representative of Costa Rica pointed out, we do not have a standing army in Costa Rica. And I had to say, I knew that, but I don't know if they're the only country that doesn't have a standing army. Perhaps others can elaborate if they know of other countries that don't have a standing army. So that was good. Students took notice. And somehow the question of Gaza came up, and one of the students asked another student, do you know about Gaza? The student said, had no idea, absolutely no idea what was happening at Gaza, had never seen anything on any site about Gaza, and was completely clueless. Hard to understand, but that's the reality of an elite private school here in Melbourne, a co-ed private school. The final thing, and perhaps this, given the time, I'd have to wait for another time. During the 90s, when I was the UN representative to China, I spent 5 years negotiating human rights with the Chinese government. The Chinese have a very different perception on human security than we have here. Our approach initially was about individual human rights. They said, no, 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 no. If we advocate individual human rights, you'll have refugees sailing up the East River into New York. We have to feed, clothe, and house our population. That's our approach. It's communal human rights that matter, not individual human rights. For your information, a couple of anecdotes for you, or 3 anecdotes. Look up Costa Rica, peace and security. Thank you, Russell.
Thanks very much, Ian. I suspect some of our Pacific neighbours may not have standing armies, but we'll leave that to another time. So thank you all very much. Thank you to our 3 speakers, to Ludmila, to Julie, and to Donna. Thank you for giving us the time tonight and giving us insights. The Stayin Alive booklet's available for download, and it's in the chat. The link is in the chat. And we will have another webinar on the UN at 80 on the Thursday, the 23rd of October. So you've probably seen it in your inbox already, but we'll certainly be promoting that. It's at a later time between 8 and 9 because we've got somebody live from New York and they had to get up at 5 a.m. to talk to us on a webinar. Somebody from the UN who's hopefully can give us some direct insights into what's happening in that body at this very difficult time for them. So thank you all for attending. I thanked our speakers. I thanked, just make sure I haven't missed anyone out. So yes, thank you all, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you and good night.